Hi everyone, this is Katie Bergloff, and I'm here today to do my second video over relieving tension in muscles in the face and upper body for brass players or classical musicians who are experiencing pain in any of these areas. Now, if it is nerve related or has to deal with a muscle tear, please don't perform any of these stretches at home. Again, please consult a doctor or a specialist that can help you with these before you try any of these. And then please do your research as well if you're interested in any of these forms of stretches. Now, in the first video that I did of stretches was mainly focused on myofascial release techniques, which you will either find in practitioners of myofunctional dentistry or myofascial therapists, or even in neurodentistry. And the reason why I showed those was because those stretches mainly deal with more of our larger muscle groups in our face and had to deal with the muscles of mastication. Mastication meaning chewing, eating, swallowing, talking, speaking. The importance of this is that they are the larger muscle groups that tie into our jaw movements. So we do use our jaw a lot for playing, for singing, for talking, and especially playing our instrument. We move our jaw in very little subtle ways and we may not even realize it. This is really important for brass and wind players because we don't often pay attention to how much jaw movement we actually use. Whether it's holding it in position in one spot, even just the slightest holding it outwards or in a different position than its natural resting state, it can cause wear and tear over time. So it's important to learn about efficient jaw movement and what that looks like and what healthy jaws look like outside of your playing. This is especially important when it comes to recovery, but it's also important in preventative strategies. So the first video of stretches I showed dealt with more myofascial release techniques, which deal with going on the inside of the mouth. So using your hand or your thumb to go on the inside of the mouth to release those deeper tissues. Now, why is it important to release tissues in the first place? I just want to review this because I feel it's important to discuss. So with myofunctional techniques, they're addressing fascia, and fascia has to deal with connective tissue in the body. Our muscles are held in place by ligaments and tendons. So tendons are basically, you want to think of it like the glue that holds the muscle attached to the bone. So wherever the muscle ends and attaches to the bone, you're going to go ahead and find a tendon there. And when it comes to ligaments, ligaments are tougher because they bind the bones together. You're going to find them in more of the joint areas. They're very sturdy and they all hold a lot of tension. When you think of tissue and fascia, you want to think of like almost like the inside of an orange. Even better is if you look at like you're looking at a turkey that you're making for Thanksgiving, you see all the connective tissue, or even when you're making a steak, all the connective tissue you have to cut off and get rid of because it's very tough. And so we have a lot of this connective tissue within our body, within our joints, especially there to protect our joints and our movement. But tissue can also build up over time and can cause a lot of damage if we're not constantly addressing it, if we're not using stretches or doing proper health care, like making sure that we're hydrated all the time or that we're doing tension release techniques. Even if we aren't injured, we should still be doing these practices just to avoid injury and also to help elongate our muscles and increase flexibility. Now I want to talk about the other set of muscle groups in the face. There's the groups of muscles that surround mastication, and then there's a group of muscles that deal with facial expression. Now this is going to tie more into our playing as far as the smaller muscle groups that we use. So these stretches are more on the exterior, but I'm going to talk about some of the things that I do to release tension in the smaller muscle groups in my face. The facial muscle groups are composed of the forehead, the auricular, which is muscles surrounding the ear back here, the orbital, which surround the eye, the nasal, which deal with nasal muscle contractions, and then oral, which is of course the mouth, then the neck. So I'm kind of breaking it down to the different groups, but I'm mainly classifying it as either muscles of mastication or facial expression muscles. So we're just focusing on those two. So now we're focusing on facial muscle expressions. So when it comes to oral, the first one we're going to talk about that most brass and wind musicians know about is going to be the orbicularis oris. So about the orbicularis oris, it has a distinction about it because the orbicularis oris, this muscle right here, our lips, is freestanding. It's a muscle called a sphincter muscle. So being a sphincter muscle, it's supposed to maintain constriction. What does that mean? Basically, because it is a freestanding muscle, it is therefore controlled by the surrounding muscles that are tied into it or attached to it. So if you look at the picture of the orbicularis oris here, you'll see the muscles that are attached to it and going from the lip and attaching to the cheekbone, and also down here to the mandible. So when we're thinking about where our muscles derive and they connect, these ligaments connect and tendons connect, you're gonna wanna think about the pointy edges of our face and our bones. Any pointy area, there's gonna be a muscle connecting there. So as you see in the picture, a lot of these muscles that control our orbicularis oris that are tied to it reach far back into the cheekbones, or they connect down into the mandible. So that means that the muscles up here and down here, our upper and lower group of muscles, control our playing. So we want to focus on those. It's important to address the smaller muscles and relieving tension in them. So when people talk about embouchure form of function, they're always talking about, you know, like general physiology, like, oh, keep your chin flat and keep your corner straight and blah, blah, blah. No, we need to look at it more from a sports medicine point of view, more understanding of the anatomy of it and how those muscles function, where they derive from, where the muscles connect and they originate, as well as nerve function. But that's a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to go into details about that, okay? The main thing is you don't have to know everything, but when it comes to training musicians, when we're developing our skills or we're becoming very highly advanced players, or whether we're dealing with the injury, whether it's preventative or it's dealing with recovery methods, we want to think about flexibility. But just a general overview, muscles are of course what contract and stimulate and cause movements, along with the nerves and the neural signals. But the ligaments, again, attach to the bone, and these deal with sprain or injuries. The ligaments are what connect the bones together. And then the tendons, which attach the muscle to the bone, you'll see more injuries revolving around tendonitis or inflammation happening in tendons. So that's why you see a lot of this happening around the jaw joint. Sometimes it derives farther back in their face. So that's why I always talk about in recovery or even in training, it's important to address the body outside the plane. It's important to address some of these larger muscle groups because a lot of retention goes from farther back. So that's why I always address the jaw first. So when you look at sports medicine and how they train the muscles and how they take care of their muscles, we don't often bridge that information over into music and medicine, which they're trying to do more, but we have a lot of catching up to do. Rather than relying on like, oh, this is the way your embouchure should look when you're playing, that kind of stuff, I want to understand further. Understanding the anatomy, also understanding how muscles contract as well. So just a short description, muscles have to work in synergy with one another. So usually when you're contracting a muscle, there's two muscles that are kind of opposing each other, an agonist muscle and an antagonist muscle. And when they're working together, they have this synergetic flow. The motor neurons are being sent out from the brain signal, and then the smooth movement happens and it initiates. But when you have something like embouchure dystonia, that signal is broken and then these muscles are fighting. And because they're not synergetic, it's causing a lot of tension in our playing as we're trying to work with them. Even when you are injured, you have to understand the importance of the muscle contraction and the relaxation of that muscle. Because when athletes are training, they understand the incorporation of flexibility in their training. So how do we build flexibility as brass musicians, as wind instrumentalists? A lot of times we like to think of like resolving our tension through just playing the instrument. We think, oh, just do a general low warm-up, that'll get the circulation going, boom, we're ready to go. Or we think about that means we have to practice all these exercises like going up and down our partials, working on arpeggios and slurring things and building flexibility throughout the range of our playing. When it comes to training like an athlete, we want to think again about what we do outside of our playing. If you're a professional marathon runner, you're not gonna say, oh, how am I gonna relieve tension in my legs? I'm just gonna start running at a slow pace and that should warm me up and then I'm good to go. I'm just ready to go. But no, they're like, I have to stretch. I have to hydrate. I have to make sure that I'm ready and prepped, and more importantly, that I have the flexibility in order to run this long length amount of time. And sometimes we don't realize that part of our training when it comes to building endurance, we have to practice fatiguing ourselves in order to improve our endurance. But it's the addressing the tension long playing periods that's important, and doing it outside of our playing. So when it comes to flexibility and stretches, you'll often hear me talk a lot about range of motion. Range of motion generally refers to joint movement, how flexible and how far can you move your joints, what's the healthy range of motion, but it also refers to muscle movement too. How flexible are the muscles in your face? Do they feel smooth when you move them in a certain direction or formation? And when you move those muscles into those formations, what are you feeling as well? Having body awareness while you're doing it too. So flexibility is basically the ability to move your muscles to a full range of motion or healthy range of motion. Flexibility is reduced when muscles become short and tightened with disuse, causing an increase in injury and strain. So when I think about brass playing, I'm like, wow, there are a lot of muscles that we don't know or we don't address in our playing. Oftentimes when we go and play, we just put our instrument up and start playing, and we're not actually practicing other muscle movements outside of our playing. Besides that, we're constantly doing this repetitive task of forming this embouchure formation and going and going and going and going and going. And we don't really think about how can I oppose those muscle groups to also gain flexibility in my face and in my muscles so that I'm not just overusing this one set of muscle group all the time. How can we build flexibility into these muscles? Well, one of the best ways is just by doing just different facial expressions and building in flexibility exercises outside your plane. This can decrease the chance of injury and inactivity. It also increases the chances of coping with intense physical challenges that we face. So what these stretches are called dynamic stretches, because there are different forms of stretches you can do, and you can look them up. Static stretching, dynamic stretching, ballistic, which you don't want to do ballistic. But why I call this dynamic stretching is because they should be performed at the start of your workout or at the start of your practice. It prepares your body for the tasks you're going to be doing. So when we talk about dynamic stretches, this is talking about moving parts of your body and gradually increasing reach and speed, controlled body movements that take you to the limits of your range of motion. So don't confuse it with ballistic stretching, which you don't want to do. Ballistic stretching is like more of like a jerky movements that force the body beyond their range of motion. Also, the reason why dynamic stretching is important is because it's movement based. And as many of you know, embouchure dystonia in particular is called a movement-based disorder. It's a neurological disorder, but it's this lack of sensory and lack of being able to move our muscles in the way we want to. Now, I want to talk quickly about this agonist and antagonist muscle group for those who have embouchure dystonia. One of the main problems we have, and you'll find, and maybe even those who are experiencing some type of overuse or motor degradation, I noticed while doing stretches over the years that it's much easier to contract the muscle, but that it's that releasing, that relaxing of the muscle, that opposing muscle group that's very hard to do. With embouchure dystonia, it's really difficult because usually when we go into this formation of playing, we're experiencing spasms, but when we try to relax, it's even harder. It's like just a million times worse. It's the in-between state between the tension and the relaxation that we struggle with. It's that in-between state, that movement that's happening in between. So I'll talk about this in a second here. So the first thing about these stretches is that they address observing the range of motion, observing any abnormalities in the muscle movement, whether it's experiencing tension or spasms or twitches or any involuntary contractions that are happening. If there's any lack of sensory, taking note of that. If there's any problems with limited movement, or if I'm having any nerve pain while I'm doing this. So just really paying attention to the body and what's happening while I'm doing these stretches. Also, as I do these stretches and focus on increasing flexibility and range of motion, I also do resistant training as well. I'll show you how I do that. I just do it kind of with my fingers, like resisting certain muscle movements and pushing against it, like using that force. And also I've heard of some people using in retraining like tape to tape muscles in certain places and like kind of resist that muscle movement or to try to oppose that contraction. I haven't ever tried that, but if you have, please let me know how you do it. And I'd love to know. I might experiment with that a little more and see how it goes, but I've never tried that before. But I do tend to do something like that with my tongue tension release exercises, which I use like a tongue depressor. And I'll also put a PDF in the comment section or in the description section that deals with that tongue depressor exercises, as well as some other key facial exercises you can use to help relieve tension. They're really good. So if you're interested in those, please look at that PDF in the description section. And why I said tongue tension is because a lot of those who have embouchure dystonia or any type of oral fascial dystonia or cranial dystonia, a lot of us have our dystonia tie into our speech or into our tongue. So it's hard for us to tongue in our playing, but it also sometimes carries over to our speech. So for me, addressing tongue tension was also a really big thing too. So there's two types of stretches that I do for our facial muscle expression groups. And the two types are certain formations that have nicknames, like the sour lemon scrunch or like the sad clown frown. I just nickname it these because it's much easier to just be like, oh yeah, I know that formation, or I know that stretch. And then also doing stretches side to side and seeing how it functions the same or differently. This is important for those who are experiencing Bell's palsy or dystonia because we lack that type of sensory. Some of us are having troubles with lower lip control on one side, or we're dealing with twitches on one side, or we're dealing with tension or bulkiness on more so on one side of our face because we're doing a lot of compensatory movements. If you have like an anatomy book like Gray's Anatomy, you can look at the facial muscles in that book and just kind of like focus on different areas and try to like use different formations to experiment with those muscles and see if you can stretch them in different ways, or even just exercise those muscles in different ways. But for a large part, it's going to take a lot of just tapping into your body awareness and getting used to feeling where the tension is in these little muscles in your face, because we don't often pay attention to them. We're not aware of them. They're so tiny and we're just like, I don't know if there's tension in that muscle. But the more you do these stretches, you'll find that you'll notice where there is tension and how to resolve it. Because years into doing this, I actually started to pick up on like, oh wow, I have a lot of tension in my mentalis, in my chin muscle, and it would move around a lot, either on one side or it would be on both sides, but I'd notice it move around to different muscle groups, and knowing them and figuring out which muscle groups they were, it really helped me a lot. After you do these stretches, you can also test your improvement either on like your mouthpiece or on your horn. Now you want to do these stretches really slowly. It's very important to only do it about 2 to 3 times a day if you need to, and then also again consult your doctor or specialist. When I think of tension, especially when it comes to dystonia, I think of it as a coiled spring. So when you have a coiled spring, it's all knotted up. Usually if you try to flatten out that spring, it just snaps right back. So when it comes to relieving tension, I think of a coil spring, you want to kind of iron it out, you know, one little bit at a time. That's why it's important to keep doing stretches over a long period of time and consistently. It's not going to just relieve your tension in one day. That's why I always talk about how like with brass players or musicians, we tend to wait till the last minute, and then we're injured, we're like, what can I do? And then we want like one technique that helps like resolve it all at once. And it's more of these preventative strategies that we have to start implementing over a long period of time before we even get injured that will help us. So if I say, well, one of the ways you can relieve tension from your embouchure dystonia is stretches. You can't just do it one day and then expect it to just fix everything, or that it's the only thing you should be doing. And the same with preventative strategies. You can't just be like, well, I'm just gonna every now and then do stretches. Again, thinking of yourself like an athlete. If I'm gonna go and work out, I'm gonna do stretches every single time. I'm gonna hydrate every time. I'm gonna take my supplements every time. I'm not gonna skip any steps and then, you know, tell my coach later down the road, well, oh, I only started stretching when I started preparing for the big tournament. All right, so finally getting to the stretches. What do I do? These are very simple stretches. The first thing I do is think about hydration. Hydrating those muscles, getting them ready for the day, even taking supplements if you need to, taking collagen to support the joints, also glucosamine sulfate, which also supports the joints and tissue. You can take potassium. So I'll usually start off my day either just doing like a general massage on my face, and then in my embouchure dystonia video, I talk about seeing the range of motion on my neck at first. So I'll sit up straight and I kind of look around the room like in a square and try to assess if I have limitations there first. And then I do neck stretches and back stretches when I wake. But after I'm doing my neck stretches and my back stretches and my shoulder stretches, sometimes right away I'll just start massaging my face, and just massaging my face wherever I can, just to kind of relax it and get the muscle circulation going. If you're in recovery mode, really try to avoid any caffeine or alcohol or sugar, anything that dehydrates the body or overstimulates you. But getting the blood circulation going, massaging my face in various places and on the outside. I also like to use this little tool. It's just a cosmetic thing. I like that it has a longer one here and then also a shorter one there that kind of helps me get deep into my jaw over here. I do my castor oil regimen in the morning. And for those that don't know, my castor oil regimen is that I swish around 2 to 3 tablespoons of castor oil in my mouth. I do that for about 20 minutes, then I spit it in the garbage, and then I just rinse out my mouth and I brush my teeth. I have really intense oral care, like I use like a water flosser, and I have like a very special electric toothbrush, and I do the flossing and everything. I take optimate care of my mouth. When you're injured, it's like you don't want to have any other bad thing happen to your face or prohibit you from playing. So it's like maybe going a little over the top, but that's what I do. But the castor oil is important. Castor oil is actually an anti-inflammatory, and I feel like it's more natural to use for me than, you know, a lot of people like to rely on like Advil or Aleve, and I'm like, I don't like that at all. I just use castor oil for everything. That's my secret to resolving tension in my face. It's helped me for many years, and I absolutely love it. And then after I do kind of this facial massage or relax my face, I go into the myofascial release techniques that I showed in the last video, and trying to release the lateral pterygoid and the medial pterygoid, especially the larger muscle groups for surrounding mastification. And then I go to the smaller muscle. When I start the smaller muscle groups, again, these are a lot easier to understand because it's just general facial expressions that you can make. But the first stretch I do is called the air bubble or water bubble stretch. You can use water if you want to, or air, but you just basically fill your cheeks up with air and your upper lip with air, and you're just gonna swish it around. And you can do it really slowly, or you put more air in certain areas where you have more tension, like maybe you have more tension in your masseter, so you're gonna put more air back there, or maybe your orbicularis oris up here, you're like, I want to put more air in there, stretch. But I will just move it around, and sometimes I just hold. And the reason I like this one is because not only do I use it as a form of stretch, but Dr. McGrail, who specialized in helping musicians and especially brass players with muscle tear recovery, this is one of his stretches that he uses to help. If you watch my video interview that I did with Jonathan Viker, he talks about his surgery. Also, Denver Deal, who is a famous trumpet player and military musician, wrote a book over his recovery from his muscle tear, and he talks about this stretch that Dr. McGrail also uses too. But yeah, basically you're gonna put air in your mouth and just hold up that stretch. I might cover my face because, again, these stretches are really embarrassing for me to show on camera. And I forgot to mention that when you're doing stretches are meant to be reached to a level of uncomfortability. You want to feel slightly uncomfortable so you get that stretch in, but you don't want it to be painful. That's where it differs between myofascial release, because myofascial release techniques, they hurt, and that's why it's important to work with a specialist. Whenever you're stretching from the inside out, or you're releasing tissue or heavy tissue in areas, you're going to want to work with myofascial release therapists, and you have to use a lot of pressure to release that. But when it comes to general stretches of the facial expression muscles, it shouldn't be painful. It should feel slightly uncomfortable when you do the stretch because you want to get that tension out of there, but it shouldn't be painful. And again, that's why it's important to do these, because then you can address if there is any areas where you're having too much pain. Also, I like doing the bubble stretch. You'll see me in a lot of my videos where I'm playing, either in brass quintet or my blog over the years. You'll see me doing that bubble stretch when I'm resting. When I'm playing, I'll play a little bit and then I'll do the stretch and then I'll play a little more. Also, I just really want to say really quickly, this one also stretches out the buccinator muscle, but the buccinator muscle is an accessory muscle. The next stretch I do is really funny. I call it the goldfish lips or duck lips, and I really don't want to show this one. But what I like about this is that it stretches out the orbicularis oris, but also we're opposing a lot of the smaller muscle groups that we use to form our embouchure, but we're doing it in the opposite direction. So a lot of times when we form our embouchure, we're doing a lot of like this motion. The duck lips, of course, we're using that muscle group and we're going outwards, we're extending outwards. If you think about it, even when we're eating, we're talking, we're kissing, even when we pucker a little bit, we don't even go out to that full extreme motion like the duck lips. Selfie takers know the duck lips, and I guess that used to be a trend, but I like this stretch and this formation because it opposes those muscles that we use, that we're constantly repetitively forming in the opposite direction than the duck lips, if that makes sense. So when you're doing these formations, I want to mention it's very important to focus on the slow movement and focusing on point A to B. So point A is going to be resting, and point B is going to be the actual duck lip goldfish formation with your lips all the way, out in that duck lip formation. Now, when you're moving slowly to that point, you're assessing how your muscle movement is, and can you go to that full range of motion? Can you form into that full range of motion, but not rushing it, because it's this in-between state that musicians with embouchure dystonia, you're gonna find a lot of spasms happening. And this is important because as you do these stretches, you can go back and try to again assess it and see if that in-between state has improved. Point A, we're relaxed, and then once we get to point B, we're gonna get into that full formation. But once we get in that full formation, we're gonna hold out that stretch. We're gonna hold it, like really hold it out. Contract it into that stretch and hold it. At least 20 to 60 seconds, you're gonna hold that stretch, and then you're gonna release it, that duck formation, and go back to relaxed. And they're gonna try that formation again slowly and see if anything has improved in the in-between state. I hope that makes sense. I don't think I can do this on camera, so I'm gonna try and cover my face a little bit while I'm doing it, okay? I'm gonna get up close and personal, okay? Just a little bit, show you here. So you see the spasms happening there? But keep going and go into the full formation, okay? And once you get in that full formation, hold it out. And then once you relax, you're gonna go back and try it again and see if that in-between state has improved, where you were experiencing the spasms or any tension, if you've experienced anything. Even if you haven't experienced anything, just go ahead and test it and see if it feels more fluid, if it feels more flexible. Now for me, in the beginning, I had to work on these stretches a lot because it took a lot of holding out those stretches to get any tension to relieve. All right, the next stretch that I'm gonna do, I call this the sad clown frowns. I think of a clown, and you're just gonna do extreme frowning for this stretch. Now, what muscle groups does this address? This is the depressor anguli oris and the depressor labii inferioris. Depressor labii inferioris. I was thinking of Harry Potter. We're using the mentalis muscle, which is known as the pouty muscle. It helps bring our chin up in that kind of bunch. And we're using the depressor anguli oris that pull our corners down to this frown. They connect here and then they run all the way down to the mandible here. So again, you're gonna start resting state and then you're gonna slowly move those corners down into as deep of a frown as you can. I mean, really feel those corners drop down almost to the sides of your chin, almost below your chin. That's what it feels like to me. But moving very slowly again and assessing the movement, okay? And then once you get to that formation of the frown, really holding it there and squeezing it as much as you can, but not to the point of pain. I also want to mention you can also move that a little forward too, where your lower lip rolls out. So again, it can be very experimental. You can frown in different ways, like with your lower lip out, more pouty, or you can just keep the corners down here. So really just experimenting with it to see if you can find areas of tension or where you can get that stretch in. You'll find as you experiment with these and use them over a long period of time, which ones are going to help you more throughout the day. Now the next stretch that I use has helped me a lot with muscle tension in my face, but I like to call this stretch the sour lemon scrunch. And why I call it the sour lemon scrunch is because you get that look, and I'll try to do it here. You get that look like you just bit into a really sour lemon. But the importance here is that you're going to be scrunching these muscles up towards your nose, but also the muscles of your upper lip. Pretend like you're scrunching them into your nose, almost like you're trying to scrunch them up into the insides of your nose. So focusing on scrunching the upper lip and scrunching up here too, but doing it in a very slow movement. So go ahead and just try making the formation first, the sour lemon scrunch, like you just bit into a sour lemon, and then go back and try it really slowly, okay? So starting at resting and then try doing it very slowly and see if you can do it. And then again, once you get into that full formation, really squeezing as tight as you can, okay? And holding it, and then releasing and going back and trying it again. Again, a little bit of anatomy here. We're using the levator labii superioris, and we're using the levator labii superioris iliaci anasi. And we're also using the zygomaticus major and minor muscles in our face here too. We're using a lot of the upper muscle groups here to get that stretch in. So I'll go ahead and show some photos here. So the first one is the levator labii superioris. the levator labii superioris alicae nausea. And then we're using the zygomaticus major and minor muscles. Then the next one is going to be really similar to the first one. This is just basically a full pucker stretch. So you're going to pucker, but you want to keep your mouth closed. So you're not going to have an opening like you did in the first one. But again, what really helped me here is focusing on the corners. So just that resting state and then slowly moving into that full like pucker formation. And again, what I like about this one is similar like the first one in that it addresses kind of the opposing muscle movement than what we're used to using with our embouchure form and function. So go ahead and try that. And then remembering again to go back and test your range of motion and see if it's improved. And you can again apply it to your mouthpiece or your plane and see if it's improved on there as well, especially if you've been having tension, and try and see if that tension has kind of relieved a little bit when you go to buzz or play. The next one that I do, which is kind of the last of these facial expression formations that I do, which is like a stretch smile. You want to think of like the Joker on Batman. You're just basically moving the corners out laterally, and here we're going to be using the retraining muscle. So we're just stretching those corners out this way with your mouth closed, not involving any of the eye muscle movement here. So it's not that we're smiling, we're just moving the corners out this way. Again, starting with that resting formation, then to the full formation. Then stretch it and then go back and assess your range of motion again. Now I'm going to go ahead and move into the stretches and muscle movement formations that I do side to side that are important to assess side to side. But before I do that, I want to kind of review some of the upper muscle groups and lower muscle groups for those who are interested. And I'm sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing anatomy terms. In more of the upper muscle groups here that I'm showing, we have levator labii superioris, and this just basically lifts the upper lip. But as you see, it kind of runs along the nose and into that cheekbone. And then there's the zygomaticus major and minor, which lift the corners when you smile. So again, it's more attached to that kind of cheekbone area. And then there's the buccularis oculi, which some people argue that doesn't really play a role in our playing. This is where you kind of develop crow's feet, but when I was doing muscle stretches, I did find that I had a lot of tension there. It may even be more of the temporalis muscle, but I always felt like massaging there helped a lot with relieving tension in my playing too, which is kind of odd. Let me know if that's the case for you too. And again, the risorius, which is like the fake smile. And then we have the levator anguli oris, which moves the mouth corners up. It's a little bit deeper and farther out from the nose. And the levator labii superioris alicae nausea raises the upper lip and dilates the nostrils. It's more for like sneering. And I guess Elvis was really known for it because he kind of had that little sneer in his smile. I feel like that's what happens to me because I have a muscle contraction on one side of my face. That always happens. But you'll see that it kind of like runs alongside the nose and into the lip. And then the lower muscle groups we're talking about here, there's 3 of them. It's the mentalis, the depressor labii inferioris, and then the depressor anguli oris. You'll see the mentalis here, and it's right between the lip and the chin. And this like basically raises and thrusts out the lower lip, and it helps with like pouting or bunching the chin. And then the depressor anguli oris, this deals with lowering the corners and the frowning like we were doing. And then the depressor labii inferioris just pulls down our bottom lip. So this also deals with lower lip control. This muscle also helps assist with any other chin formation or movements. Okay, so talking about the side-to-side movement and the stretches and assessing the range of motion, you're basically just gonna go around and do muscle groups on one side and then the other and assess them. So one of the first ones I like to do is like just moving this corner using more of like the zygomaticus major and minor and that rossoris muscle, like pulling it backwards this way. So basically just kind of smirking. So I practice smirking from side to side. And again, you're starting in this resting formation and then slowly moving back. I'll try to show you here. But I experience a lot of spasm and twitches when I do it, and I'll experience it usually on one side more than the other. So this side. So you can see this side is much better. And as many of you know, when I speak in my videos, this is going to be my side that compensates for this side a lot. This one has a lot of the bulkiness, and my right side has a lot of bulkiness in it. Has more muscle control and more sensory. For this side, it's more lacking that sense of it's lacking more of that sensory. Like I can't really move it as easily as I want to. And when it comes to describing that, I think the easiest way to explain is like eyebrow movement. So if you're like, what do you mean by lack of sensory? So I want you to try, and not a lot of people, most people experience this, but you're gonna try to move your right eyebrow upwards independently from your left. Okay, just try doing that. And then try doing the left side and see if that works. So my right side is a lot harder to move on its own. So it's not that they're moving completely independently, but you know what I mean? It's like when I think about moving this one up, does this one go down or is it trying to move with it? So it's like feels like that. That's what I mean by that like kind of lack of sensory. It's like you're trying to control the muscle independently and it's just not working. But that's another example of like assessing side to side, like that eyebrow move, and then just experimenting with different muscle groups side to side. So you could do like the corner muscle movements in different directions side to side. Like it doesn't have to just be this way, it can go this way, or you can do frowning too, again focusing on the scrunching here like side to side. And so it looks really funny and that kind of stuff, but it really helps. And I think that the more we kind of implement this body awareness, but also these stretches, it can be preventative, but it can also help with recovery when we're going through something like facial trauma or some type of music related injury. So after I'm done doing all of this, I also want to make that I'm not just hopping right into practice, because you do need to want to rest a little bit. If you are experiencing any inflammation or any type of like pain afterwards after doing this, make sure that you're doing the proper like ice and heat packing care to relieve that inflammation. But you have to remember that stretching in itself is kind of a form of a workout. So when you're doing these stretches, don't overdo it. And then if you aren't used to doing it all the time, make sure you're taking the proper rest before you start hopping into any physical activity that you're doing with practice. And just making sure that you're paying attention to your body and giving yourself the proper time to prep, to do the prep work. Often you'll see my videos, I call it prep work. Like I'll say, oh, I haven't done my prep work for the day. When I say prep work, I'm talking about all these stretches, this whole video, this whole cycle of stretches that I'm doing and body care. But I really do feel it's important to implement in our practice routine, in students' routines, as a form of preventative care. And also for those who are rehabilitating or recovering from certain injuries. And also I'll go and do another video. I was planning on doing a video over like the neck tension relieving strategies, and also some of the more of the upper body muscles around the neck and the back and shoulders, which I'll talk about in the next video. I'll use different types of massage tools to help relieve tension in the upper body and any muscles. If you're working with a myofascial therapist, you might want to talk to them about purchasing like certain size like tools. Like they'll have like a little ball that they use sometimes to help press on the tissue, like for example like pressing down on the tissue here to release it, and they'll hold it, and sometimes this little ball just gets in areas that you can't quite reach that tissue. and it helps kind of relieve that. I used to use like a little one on my face, but now I have the roller, which helps a lot. Also my lumbar stretcher here, and as you can see, I can just put it on the ground and do a bunch of different stretches on it. You can also use it on the wall and lean up against it. I also use it as a back support device when I'm sitting in a chair to help like with the spine curvature. And then I have some other tools as well that I'm not going to show because it'll take too long. And then I also have my ice roller, which I really like, and you can buy this on Amazon. It also came along with this. I also like using the heat packs that are like the bean bags, and you might have to buy those. I don't know if you can buy those at stores, so you might have to look around online, but it's like basically like a little bean bag, and you can make one yourself. And I like the bean bag heat packs because you can just like throw them in the microwave. But anyways, I hope that this helped. Please let me know if you try any of this out. Again, go ahead and look in the description section because I'm gonna have PDF links for more exercises that you can do with your face and also your tongue, and I'll also include the PDF for the jaw movement exercises that I showed in my TMJ video. If you want to check out the first video that I did, that one's over myofascial release technique used on more of the larger muscle groups, and then before that there is another video I did over TMD. You can check that one out as well. I also have 3 videos on YouTube which are over myofascial release technique as well, where I'm addressing a comment that somebody asked. Otherwise, go ahead and check out some of my videos. I have 4 videos over focal embouchure dystonia rehabilitation, and those ones are really long and they go over everything that I've done that's helped me recover my playing. Alright, thank you guys. I hope you have a good day. Bye.